To get her life back on track after trauma, a young woman decides to try hypnotherapy. However, after a few sessions, she notices something strange is going on. The hypnotist puts his mind against hers in a potentially fatal situation. Will she be able to escape from the evil man's control?
Hello, and welcome to our channel. Today we'll recap and review a sci-fi movie called Hypnotized.
Jen arrives very late at the housewarming party of her friends Gina and Scott. The couple did not expect her to come since she did not respond to any of their calls. Jen's ex-fiance is inside, so her friend informs her that she'll just come up with an excuse for her. A bit hesitant, she still goes inside and requests a glass of wine. Clearly, she is uncomfortable being around his ex, so Scott apologizes to her because of the situation. Gina shortly after introduces her to Dr. Collins, whom she keeps on praising. Jen jokes around, saying she didn't know that therapists could hang out with their clients. He responds with a joke of his own. However, she cuts the conversation short since she's not comfortable seeing his ex-fiancé, Brian, across the room. After a while, the five of them start talking with each other. Brian shares his involvement in a project where he wrote some codes as a software engineer.
Dr. Collins finds out that Jen also works in a similar industry, and his ex praises her for being an excellent software engineer. During a conversation, Brian reaches out for food on the table and is about to eat it, but Jen quickly stops him. Apparently, he is allergic to sesame, and it would have been fatal if he would have eaten it.
Before the party, Dr. Collins hands over his calling card to Jen, who is somewhat intoxicated by drinking too much wine. She accepts it anyway. The ex-couple finds an opportunity to talk alone outside. He misses her, but she seems to be having a hard time reciprocating it back to him for some reason. He offers to give her a ride and end up making love that night. Gina finds out about what happened and asks if they are getting back together, but they are not. Clearly, Jen is not in a good place right now. She points out Jen's situation, trying to isolate herself, and she is currently unemployed. Seeing her current situation, she encouraged her friend to visit Dr. Collins and try his therapy. Although very hesitant, she agrees to see the specialist. She arrives at his clinic and waits. A very weird woman who is also a patient of the therapist comes out and talks to her for a moment. She claims that the therapist really helped her with her OCD. Jen goes inside the room and has a little small talk with the therapist before beginning the session.
Something is really off with the girl. Wouldn't it make you reconsider going ahead with the therapy session?
Although still skeptical, she starts her session with Dr. Collins. She tries to avoid talking about her relationship with his ex-fiancé, but is convinced to open up. They met in college, and the overall relationship was great up until she had a miscarriage.
She was 6 months pregnant with their son, Daniel, when it happened. After that, it became difficult for them to figure things out, which led them to their breakup.
The doctor offers his patient the idea of trying hypnotherapy, but she's not up for it. He then explains that she would still be in control, and the process is an excellent tool for people who have suffered just like her. Jennifer wants to be happy again, so she ends up trying it. She lies on the couch and listens to the instructions of her therapist with her eyes closed. Although the session actually ended after an hour, she feels like it was way shorter than that, and at the time, she doesn't remember anything. 3 months pass by, and Jen continues to attend her therapy sessions every week. A lot of things changed and improved, like she is now returning to being employed. However, she still finds it hard to reconnect with her ex-fiancé, so she avoids his calls. While doing yoga with her friends, they share that their therapist only conducted 2 hypnotherapy sessions with her, so she wonders if she can ask for more of that. One night while Jen was peacefully sleeping, she had a very weird dream about her and Dr. Collins together in a bed. The scene moves to the mall, where she looks at a mother and her child spending some quality time together. She and the therapist accidentally cross paths. He eagerly invites her to have some coffee. She gladly shares with the therapist her progress. On the other hand, the therapist shares something personal about his life. He discloses that he is an only child and was married once to a woman named Amy who sadly passed away. The last time they had a session, Jen was struggling with her progress with her ex-fiancé, which is still the case, so he asks about it. He suggests that Jen invites him to dinner at her home. She fully rejects the idea, but he manages to convince her once again to do it. Later that night, she drives to a store to buy some things for dinner with her ex. As soon as she gets out of the car, she receives a phone call from an unknown number, then suddenly blacks out after answering it. Feeling confused, she finds herself sitting in a dining area with a meal already prepared. She quickly stands up and hears someone choking. She slowly enters the bathroom and sees her ex-fiancé lying on the ground, choking. She immediately helps him out by injecting the emergency pen into his thigh and calling an ambulance. She clearly doesn't remember what happened that night, so after 8 days, she asks her therapist about it during their session. Before she completely starts to doubt herself, the therapist intervenes. Later that night, she wakes up from a weird dream involving the therapist again. She goes out of bed to drink some water. When she accidentally finds a receipt from the store she went to on the day of the incident, her memories slowly return.
Can this really happen in real life? And can this really be done by a real hypnotherapist? I mean, some people claim not to remember anything after an accident or if someone becomes really aggressive in a fight.
This triggers her to do some background research about Dr. Collins. She finds a significant number of disturbing reports linked to the therapist, so she prints them all out and shows them to her friend Gina. At first, her friend was far from convinced that the therapist had anything to do with the reports. It changes when Jen shows the receipt found containing sesame oil. Since she remembers everything from the incident, she confesses to her friend that she did it on purpose but wasn't her normal self. Knowing her friend, they decide to go to the police to gather more information. They met Wade, a detective who is familiar with the case of a previous patient of the therapist. After finding out that they are a patient of the suspect, the detective shares confidential information about pictures and video clips of the previous patient of the therapist who died 6 months ago. The detectives advises them to find a new therapist. Feeling uneasy after talking with the detective, Gina mentions to her friend that she went to their therapist a week ago and underwent hypnotherapy. Jen decides to visit the therapist again and record him while he conducts hypnotherapy on her. After the session, she quickly goes to her car and listens to the recording, only to find out that he was already onto them. She rushes to call her, but the connection is cut off before she is able to tell that the therapist already knows. Gina is in the car with her husband. She continues to drive and immediately receives another call from an unknown number. She answers it and hears the voice of his therapist. The suspect says something to her that causes her to hallucinate. When she begins to panic, she accelerates the car, which causes a car accident and claims their lives. The detective visits the therapist and interrogates him. While he talks about the cases of the therapist's previous patients, he takes a spoon and hides it in his pocket and uses it to get his fingerprint. Dr. Collins gets a little bit anxious about their conversation after the detective mentions the histories of his previous patients. After their conversation, Wade immediately goes to Jen's place and talks to her. She shares everything with the detective. The therapist is clearly after Jen, so he asks her to lay low for now and wait for his update tomorrow after he runs some fingerprint tests and sees if he can find anything. A few minutes after the detective leaves, someone knocks on the door. Thinking it was the detective, Jen opens the door and immediately becomes terrified to see Dr. Collins, so she forcefully tries to close the door.
This is why you should never open the door without first checking who's there. What a careless move from the woman knowing that she's already in danger.
The therapist says something that causes the girl to be immobilized. She is conscious, but she cannot move her body. The frightening man says that Gina and Brian were just going to get in the way, and now he aims to take care of the detective as well. The twisted brain of this therapist thinks that by doing so, he can continue to help Jen achieve her dream of becoming happy. Before he left, the mad therapist said something to make her mobilize again. She rushes to close the door and calls the detectives, but she is unable to reach him. Someone attempts to ambush the detective in his apartment.
The perpetrator is a patient of the therapist, whom Jen occasionally encounters. The wounded detective manages to survive and accidentally ends the life of the attacker.
After the incident, Jen visits the detective in the hospital. She convinces him to help her get in touch with another therapist that the police work with every now and then. As soon as their hypnotherapy session begins, she reacts in a very alarming way, causing the therapist to panic. While this is happening, Jen sees a couple of things in her dream and lists them down, an address and a date. Dr. Collins seems to have planted some sort of failsafe, so she tries to plant something on her own that will counter some triggers that the dangerous man planted. She leaves and gathers more information based on what she learned from the therapy. She finds out that the address is owned by the therapist's mentor, so she drives over there only to find out that Dr. Collins is expecting her. It turns out that his mentor is actually his father, who has already passed away. Now that Jen has been caught, her therapist uses hypnosis to make her lead the police to the wrong place. Wade immediately asks for the address of the therapist's father and changes his route. The woman finally understands everything. The reason she sees weird dreams is because the creepy therapist is implanting his wife's memories into her. Today is their anniversary as well, so he wants to fully execute his plans as well. The detective arrives at the scene to save the hypnotized woman who can't move. He cautiously moves inside the house to search for the therapist. The psychotic man manages to sneak behind the detective and hit him. Jen temporarily gets out of the room to help the detective but loses her consciousness after firing a gun. She wakes up to the voice of the detective and tells him that backup is on the way. While he comforts her, the trigger that the other therapist activates helps the distressed woman escape hypnosis. She runs away to find the real Wade while the angry therapist chases her. Eventually, she finds him wounded and barely conscious. The bullet that she fired a while ago was his instead of the doctor's. She takes the gun from the detective's ankle and shoots Dr. Collins twice, ending his life. 1 month later, she visits her ex-fiancé and the detective. The movie closes as she opens a parting gift from the detective, which is a self-hypnosis CD.
The performance of each character is worth it for you to watch this movie. The duration is quite short, causing some of the scenes to feel a bit rushed. Overall, you'll still enjoy this movie, especially if you're a fan of this unique genre that involves thrill, suspense, and deception. This type provides you with a good, all-classic psychological movie feeling as you watch it. Please subscribe to our channel to be notified when we upload. Also, don't forget to suggest movies that you want us to recap in the future in the comments down below.